They told me to go and die like I was trash on the curb. Those words, sharp, precise, and rehearsed, cut deeper than any funeral ribbon ever could. For a moment I imagined myself as that faded photograph on the mantelpiece, smiled at, admired from a distance, then stored away when the party was over. The house we raised our lives in felt suddenly foreign, as if someone had rearranged the furniture of my memory and left me standing in the doorway. Without an invitation, I sat on a motel bed with a single lamp and 2 suitcases and understood, in a way I never had before, what it felt like to be considered useless. You learn a lot when everything you owned fits into a trunk. You remember every anniversary you made special, every casserole left for a late husband, the quiet nights spent mending socks and listening to the calendar tick, and you count, with a dizzying clarity, all the small unnoticed labors that kept a life together. I could repeat the recipes and the dates and the names of our grandchildren. But that night the list that mattered was a ledger of indignities. Why I was shoved out of my own house, why my daughter stood at the door with that sentence on her lips, why a marriage of 43 years could be summarized in one cruel line. And then came the thing I hadn't expected, curiosity. Between outrage and grief there bloomed a stubborn little sense that something was not right. Richard had been meticulous, the kind of man who kept files in neat piles and never trusted a loose end. If he'd meant for me to be dispossessed, I thought, surely he would have told me. So I found a number, I walked into an office, and I listened, and the story that followed would change everything. My name is Margaret Collins. They say grief makes you blind, and I believe it now. After Richard passed, I walked through the world in a fog, doing what was expected of me, accept condolences, serve coffee to guests, keep my chin up. But when I finally walked into Harold Fitzpatrick's office, Richard's attorney for more than 30 years, that fog began to lift. Harold was an older man with gentle eyes, the kind of lawyer who never rushed a sentence. He stood when I entered, took my hand in both of his, and said, "Margaret, I was wondering when you'd come in." Something in his voice told me he already knew more than I did. I sat down in that leather chair, my palms sweating, and whispered, "Harold, I need to know about the will." My daughter said. My voice cracked. Harold frowned, puzzled. "Your daughter? Margaret, surely she gave you your copy." "I read the will weeks ago." "Weeks ago?" I blinked at him. No one had told me. I had been sitting in a motel room, humiliated and cast aside, while my daughter smiled at me like a savior, all the while keeping this secret locked away. Harold pulled a thick file from his cabinet. I could feel my heart pounding louder with each second. Then he began to read Richard's words, steady, deliberate, unshakable. The primary residence at Oakwood Drive was mine. All furnishings, all personal effects, mine. And then the numbers. 70% of Richard's financial assets, accounts and investments, mine. Not a scrap, not leftovers, but the lion's share of everything we built together over 4 decades. I felt the room tilt. My breath caught in my throat. Richard had not abandoned me. Richard had honored me. And then Harold continued, "To my daughter, Victoria Hayes, I leave $10 million to be held in trust, with distributions to begin only if she treats her mother with dignity and respect after my death." I sat in stunned silence. Respect. That single word was the condition. The lock on the door, the test Richard had set. My husband had known his daughter, our daughter, better than I did. He'd seen her greed, her sharpness, her lack of gratitude. He'd predicted exactly what she would try to do to me. All at once, the puzzle pieces fit. Victoria hadn't been my protector. She had been my jailer, waving forged papers in my face, convincing me I had nothing, when in fact I had everything. My cheeks burned with both rage and relief. Rage at my daughter's lies, but relief that Richard had trusted me enough to secure my future. I looked at Harold with tears in my eyes. She told me I had nothing, I whispered. She told me the house was hers, the accounts were hers, that I was just the wife. Harold leaned forward, his voice firm. Margaret, what she did is elder fraud. It's a crime. And now it's time we make this right. In that moment, I knew my fight had only just begun. My name is Margaret Collins, and this is the will I was never meant to see. They say a mother's heart can only break once, but that isn't true. Mine cracked again when Harold Fitzpatrick, steady as a stone, pushed the phone across his desk and said, Margaret, we're calling the police. You have to understand my whole life. I was the one who baked pies for church raffles, who stayed quiet when men made decisions, who thought lawyers and detectives belonged in somebody else's story. But suddenly, I was in the middle of one. Detective Angela Rodriguez arrived like a gust of sharp wind, tall, brisk, and unshakably calm. She listened as Harold explained, her pen scratching fast across a legal pad. Every forged paper, every lie, every humiliation Victoria had poured over me was laid bare on that desk. And then Angela said words I never imagined I'd hear in my lifetime. We'll freeze all her accounts immediately. I almost laughed nervously at first, because the idea of my glamorous daughter, who never bought a dress for less than $400, standing at a boutique counter while her platinum card declined. Oh, it was justice served colder than ice. And that's exactly what happened. One by one, her cards were rejected. The utilities she proudly shifted into her name. Suspended. Her shiny little empire built on forged paper crumbled in a single afternoon. By nightfall, I was sitting in Harold's office, the shadows long across the bookshelves, when his phone rang. He put it on speaker. Detective Rodriguez's voice came steady and certain. Mrs. Collins, it's done. Your daughter is under arrest. I pictured the scene exactly as Angela later described it. Victoria in her silk blouse, holding a wine glass at some fancy restaurant, laughing too loudly when two officers walked in, right there in front of her friend's handcuffs. Shock on her face, denial spilling from her lips. She must have thought it was all a mistake. After all, she was always Daddy's princess, untouchable, above consequence. But not this time. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt something unfamiliar bubbling inside me, not grief, not anger, but a strange sense of being defended, protected, like the universe had finally stepped in on my behalf. I wasn't just the wife anymore. I wasn't the invisible mother shushed at the dinner table. I was a woman sitting in a lawyer's office, watching justice bend toward me. I pressed my hands flat against Harold's desk, feeling the solid oak under my palms, and whispered to myself, You're not alone anymore, Margaret. You've got people on your side now. That night, as I walked back to my motel, the air felt different, lighter. The same daughter who had thrown me out of my own house was now sitting in a police station, learning the meaning of consequences. An eye broken, tired, forgotten Mio is about to find out what it felt like to fight back. My name is Margaret Collins. And this was the first night justice finally called my name. The next morning, the phone rang. And I could hear Harold's voice, calm as ever, but with a certain sharpness to it. He didn't have to say much for me to understand. Margaret, it's over. Mark Hayes is under arrest. Mark, my son-in-law, the ever-smiling, smooth-talking investment banker. I'd never fully trusted him. There was something too perfect about him, something too polished. He always knew the right things to say, the right way to look at you, and when to offer that fake sympathy with just enough charm to keep you off balance. I remember how he used to talk down to me, as if I didn't understand the value of an asset or the intricacies of a financial portfolio. Don't worry about it, Margaret, he'd say, all smirk and condescension. Leave the money matters to the experts. I'll take care of it. But now, the experts had been caught. Harold explained to me that the forged will had been traced directly to a printer that Mark's firm used, For their crooked deals, apparently, those shady transactions had extended far beyond just this will. But now it was Mark who was the one in cuffs. I can't explain how it felt watching a man I'd once called family get arrested. His smug confidence crumbling in an instant. A small part of me felt vindicated, but it wasn't the feeling I had expected. It wasn't the joy I thought it would be. Instead, I felt something darker, something hollow. It was like the last straw had been pulled from a rug I had stood on for years. And now I was left staring at an empty floor. I walked slowly back to the house that had once been mine, Richard's and mine. A place full of memories, both painful and sweet. But today, it felt different. Victoria had moved all of her things into the master bedroom, transforming it into some shrine to her shallow taste. She'd replaced Richard's warm, organized home with her clutter of designer clothes, high-end cosmetics, and meaningless trinkets. I stood there for a moment, taking in the chaos she'd created in what used to be a sanctuary. Then, something inside me clicked. I didn't have to tiptoe around her anymore. I didn't have to let her walk all over me. I opened the door to the master bedroom, now hers, but not for long. I grabbed a stack of garbage bags from the corner and began filling them with her things, clothes, shoes, those ridiculous expensive handbags she adored more than me, more than family. I wasn't careful. I didn't fold the clothes or lay them out neatly. No, I stuffed them in, as if they were nothing more than what they were, material things. As I filled those bags, the silence of the house was deafening. No more footsteps of my children running around. No more laughter. Just the rustling of plastic bags and the weight of history. For the first time in a long while, the house felt quiet, peaceful, even. I walked out of the room, carrying those bags to the front porch. I put them down there, exactly where I knew she'd have to come to get them when she returned. For once, the house was mine. Not hers, not Richard's, but mine. I'd fought for this space, this peace, for the first time in what felt like forever. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and let myself feel the smallest sliver of victory. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. But I was finally standing on my own 2 feet. The past was over, but the future, that was something I was going to build from the ground up. My name is Margaret Collins, and this house, it's mine again. I thought I knew everything about Richard. After 43 years together, I figured I'd seen it all. The late-night meetings, the long hours at the office, the occasional trips that never seemed to add up. But I never questioned him. He was the man I married, the man I loved. He took care of the bills, the investments, the details. I didn't need to know the hows and whys. He was the one who handled that. I trusted him completely, believed in everything he said and did. That was, until the moment I walked into Harold Fitzpatrick's office and everything began to unravel. Harold, that kind lawyer who had been part of our lives for decades, called in a private investigator. Her name was Carol Chen, a woman with sharp eyes and a mind that didn't miss a thing. I remember the first time I saw Carol's face, focused, serious, like a person who had seen too many secrets and knew better than to be surprised by them. She spent hours going through Richard's files, his business dealings, his contracts, the papers that filled drawers we never touched. She was quiet at first, just making notes, her pen moving furiously across the pages. But as time went on, I started noticing her brows furrow, her lips tightening, and that look in her eyes, the kind of look you get when you find something you wish you hadn't. And then, she dropped the bombshell. Richard hadn't just been a businessman. He had been playing a game I didn't even know existed. Payments to shell companies. Huge sums of money funneled through fake consulting contracts. Businesses that didn't even exist. 12 years of this. I sat there, trying to piece together what I was hearing. For 12 years. Richard had been involved in something much darker than I ever imagined. Something so far beyond our simple life. beyond the dinner parties and family birthdays, that I couldn't even begin to comprehend it. Richard, I whispered. The name tasted foreign on my tongue now, like it didn't belong to the man who had held me at night, the man who had made me laugh, who had built this life with me. He was involved in this. Carol nodded slowly. She didn't need to say more. I could see it in her eyes. My husband, the man who had told me time and again that everything was fine, had been living a double life. I thought I knew him, but I didn't know this part. Not the part that moved money across borders. Not the part that could look me in the eyes and keep secrets like this. Suddenly, I wasn't sure who I had been sleeping next to all these years. The man who kissed me goodnight. The man who held my hand through our hardest moments. Was he the same man who had been laundering money? Or had he been to people all along one who loved me and one who lived in the shadows, making deals with people I couldn't even begin to imagine? I felt sick. My stomach turned as I processed the weight of it all. Everything I thought I knew about Richard, about our life, was slipping through my fingers like sand. I wasn't sure who I was anymore. Was I the naive wife who didn't see what was right in front of her? Or was I the fool who let love blind her to the truth? I wasn't sure of much at that moment. But one thing was certain, my life, our life, was never going to be the same. It was late afternoon when the phone rang, and the number flashing on the screen was all too familiar. I almost didn't pick up. After everything she'd done, after tossing me aside like a discarded coat, I was tired of hearing her voice. But then, some part of me, a part I still couldn't quite control, answered. Mom, listen carefully, she started. Her voice smooth, controlled, as always, like she was speaking to someone who didn't know better. The FBI is going to find out about Dad's money laundering. They'll find out everything. You'll lose everything unless you cooperate. I'm trying to protect you, but you need to understand this is bigger than us now. Her words didn't surprise me. They were the same manipulative tactics she'd used before. But this time, something about the way she said it, something in the coldness of her voice, made my blood run cold. She wasn't asking for my help, not really. She was making a threat, plain and simple. She thought she could control me, scare me into silence, like I was some helpless woman who didn't know what was going on around her. But I wasn't helpless. Not anymore. I hung up the phone without saying a word. And then, for the first time in my life, I made a decision that would change everything. I walked straight to the FBI. I don't know why I'd never thought of it before, why I had allowed myself to stay in the shadows of our marriage, letting Richard handle everything while I stayed in the background. The dutiful wife, I was done with that. I was done being silent, done being the one who always turned a blind eye. This time, I wasn't going to run away from the truth. I was going to face it head on. When I walked into the FBI office, I didn't feel scared. Not like I thought I would. I felt empowered. For the first time in years, I wasn't the victim. I wasn't the widow crying in a motel room. I wasn't the mother abandoned by her own daughter. I was a woman walking into a building, ready to reclaim everything I had lost. Agent Sarah Martinez was waiting for me when I entered. She was younger than I expected, maybe in her 30s. With dark hair pulled into a tight bun. She didn't smile, but her eyes were kind. There was no judgment in her gaze, just a steady, unwavering professionalism that made me feel like I was exactly where I needed to be. Mrs. Collins, I'm glad you came, she said, her voice calm but direct. We've been expecting you. I sat down in the chair across from her. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She got straight to the point. Victoria and Mark Hayes are trying to use you, Margaret, she said. They think they can manipulate you into silence. Use your husband's crimes as leverage. But we can help you. We can make sure they don't get away with this. I nodded, my hands trembling just a little. There was a strange comfort in hearing someone finally say out loud what I'd known in my gut all along. They had been using me. They had been lying to me, but I wasn't going to let them anymore. I'm ready to do whatever it takes, I said, my voice steady. I hadn't planned on saying those words, but there they were, falling from my lips like they had always been there, waiting for the moment when I could say them without fear. I'll cooperate. I'll help however I can. Agent Martinez didn't hesitate. She slid a small recorder across the table toward me, her eyes never leaving mine. Mrs. Collins, would you be willing to wear a wire? She asked. The words hung in the air between us. I'd never imagined I'd be in a position like this, listening to someone asking me to wear a wire, to secretly gather evidence against my own daughter. But there was no hesitation now, no second thoughts. The moment felt like a lifetime in the making, as if everything I had been through, all the pain and loss, had led me to this very moment. For the first time in my life, I said yes. I could see the faintest smile tug at the corner of Agent Martinez's lips. She didn't show much emotion, but there was something in her eyes that made me feel like she understood exactly what I was going through. She understood that I wasn't just fighting for justice. I was fighting for my dignity, for my right to be treated like a person, not just a pawn in someone else's game. We'll move quickly, Agent Martinez said, her voice full of quiet resolve. We'll make sure they know you're not the one to be manipulated anymore. You've got the power now, Margaret, and we're going to make sure you get what you deserve. I nodded again, my hands now steady on the table. I'm ready. And just like that, I became more than just the grieving widow, more than just the discarded mother. I became someone with a voice, someone with power, and I was ready to use it. I walked out of that office feeling like a different woman. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel weak. I felt like I had a purpose again. And the best part? I knew that I was going to make sure Victoria and Mark would never be able to manipulate me again. And I'm about to take back everything that was taken from me. It was just after dinner when I saw them pull into the drive with a sleek black car with Victoria at the wheel, her posture as perfect as ever, and Mark beside her. The two of them so perfectly put together it almost made me sick. There was no urgency in their movements. No sign of the panic I had expected after everything that had happened. They weren't worried, not at all. To them, this was just another game to win. I watched from the window as they walked toward the door, briefcase in hand, like they were headed to a business meeting. I took a deep breath and checked the small wire clipped to my blouse, just beneath my shirt. It was there, nestled against my skin, as invisible as the weight of everything that had led up to this moment. The FBI had set this up carefully. Agent Sarah Martinez had gone over every detail. Victoria and Mark had no idea that the truth was finally coming for them. The doorbell rang, and my heart beat a little faster, but I was calm. I had to be. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to back down. I opened the door slowly, letting them step inside without a word. The tension between us was almost tangible, like the quiet before a storm. "Mom," Victoria said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We've been trying to reach you, but, well, you know how it is. Misunderstandings happen." She smiled at me. But it wasn't the smile of a daughter, it was the smile of someone who knew she was in control. She had no idea how wrong she was. Mark, standing next to her, opened the briefcase in his hands, revealing a set of neatly prepared documents. They weren't offering an apology. No, that would be too easy. What they were offering was a deal. "You're right, Victoria," Mark said, as if he were some kind of knight in shining armor, protecting me from the world. "We know this has been tough for you. It's all been a misunderstanding." He paused for effect. "But we want to make it right." Victoria shot him a glance, one that only a wife can give her husband, before turning back to me. "You've been through a lot, Mom," she said, as if she were speaking to a child, "and I understand that. We just want to make sure you're taken care of. So we've arranged a generous settlement. you'll keep the house. You'll get $5 million more than enough to live comfortably. The words echoed in my head, each one more insulting than the last. $5 million. She was offering me what she thought I was worth, a mere fraction of what she'd tried to steal from me. And then there was the house. My home, the one I had helped build. The one that held decades of memories. Now reduced to a bargaining chip. It was so typical of her, of them both. They thought they could just buy me off, silence me with money. I took a deep breath, the anger rising up from my stomach. But I forced myself to keep calm. Tell me something, Victoria, I said, my voice steady. When did you and Mark first discover Richard's secrets? When did you find out about the money laundering? Victoria froze for a moment, and Mark's eyes flicked to the side. It wasn't a big movement, but it was enough. Their faces gave them away. The lies they had been feeding, me feeding everyone, were starting to crack. And I could see the panic behind their carefully crafted facades. I pressed on, not giving them a chance to recover. You know exactly what I'm talking about, I said. How long did you know about the deals Richard was making? How long did you hide this from me? Victoria's smile faltered for the briefest second, and Mark shifted uncomfortably, trying to regain control of the situation. Mom, you're not understanding, he said, his voice a little too tight. We're just trying to fix this. This is all part of making things right. But I wasn't having it. I knew their game now. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me any longer. You didn't want to fix anything, did you? You wanted to take what was mine. And when you couldn't, you tried to cover up your tracks. As their lies hung in the air, a sound I'd been waiting for finally echoed through the house, the sharp, authoritative sound of footsteps. The FBI had arrived. And just like that, Agent Martinez and her team stepped into the room. Their presence undeniable, their movements precise. The moment Victoria and Mark saw them, I could see the realization flood over their faces. They understood, in that instant, that the walls they had carefully constructed around their lies were about to crumble. Victoria Hayes, Mark Hayes, Agent Martinez said, her voice firm. You are both under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and elder abuse. Victoria's face drained of color, and Mark, the smug, polished man who had once treated me like I didn't matter, stood frozen, as if his very foundation had been ripped out from under him. They didn't say a word, just stared at the agents as if trying to process what had just happened. And then, as the handcuffs clicked shut around their wrists, I realized something. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was the one who had outsmarted them. I had become the one who had taken control. The sound of their voices pleading, demanding to know what was happening, faded as I watched them being escorted out of my house. Not theirs, not anymore. As the door closed behind them, I stood there, breathing deeply, taking it all in. For the first time in years, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't over yet, I knew that. But for the first time in a long time, the scales of justice were tipping in my favor. And I was no longer alone, and this time, it's me who gets to write the ending. They say you never really know someone, not completely. But after 43 years with Richard, I thought I knew him better than anyone else ever could. He was steady. He was reliable. He was my Richard, the man I laughed with, cried with, and built a life with. I had never once doubted his loyalty or his love for me. But then came the moment when everything changed. When I discovered that the man I thought I knew was someone entirely different. I'll never forget the day the truth hit me, the truth I hadn't seen coming. The truth that shattered everything I believed about our life together. It started with a conversation I had with Carol Chen, the private investigator who had been digging into Richard's business dealings. After all the chaos, after everything that had happened with Victoria and Mark, I was still left with questions. I needed answers. I needed to know what Richard had really been involved in. And when Carol dropped the next bombshell, it wasn't just a twist. It was a full-blown revelation that rewrote The story of my entire life. Margaret, there's something you need to know. Carol's voice was serious, but there was an edge of hesitation. Like she was about to break something to me that even she couldn't fully process. Richard wasn't just laundering money. He was working with the FBI, deep undercover. At first, I couldn't process what she was saying. I stared at her, my mind spinning in circles. What do you mean? He was working with the FBI. How? Why didn't he tell me? Carol leaned forward, folding her arms, her eyes never leaving mine. For over a decade, Richard was an informant. He was working with the FBI, helping them build cases against organized crime families. The money he was moving, that money was earned through his cooperation, through the very work he was doing to help bring down dangerous criminals. He wasn't laundering money for himself. He was doing it for the government. And all the money he left you, it's real. It's legal. It was earned through his role as a federal informant. I sat there, stunned. Completely still. I couldn't breathe for a moment, like the air had been sucked out of the room. Richard, the man who had held my hand through every storm, the man who had made me feel safe in a world full of uncertainty, had been doing something I never could have imagined, and I hadn't known a thing, not one. But then, it all began to make sense. The trips Richard had taken, the late nights, the calls I'd heard him make in the early hours of the morning. I'd always chalked it up to work stress, to the pressures of running a business. But now, it was clear that his late nights had never been about a project or a deal. He'd been risking his life too. Help the FBI. He hadn't betrayed me. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been protecting me in ways I could never have imagined. Carol went on, explaining how Richard's undercover work had led to a series of arrests. In fact, and how the criminal networks he'd helped dismantle had been far more dangerous than I could have ever known. But it wasn't just about the arrests. It was about Richard's courage, his selflessness. He had put his life on the line for something bigger than us, something I had never even seen. And the money he left me, it wasn't dirty money. It was the result of his efforts to bring criminals to justice. I sat there in disbelief, trying to wrap my mind around it. But why didn't he tell me? I asked. Why didn't he trust me with this? Carol's expression softened, and she sighed. Richard probably thought he was protecting you. He probably didn't want you to know the risks he was taking. He kept you in the dark because he wanted to shield you from the danger. That came with his work. But what he did for you. He did it to protect you. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about Richard shifted. The man I had loved for all those years had been living a secret life, one that I never could have understood. He had been doing something dangerous, something most people couldn't even imagine, all while I was living my quiet life at home. But he had never once let me see the fear, the danger. He had carried it all on his own, and he had kept me safe from it. I felt a mixture of emotions, shock, pride, disbelief. I was angry, yes, angry that he had kept this from me, that I had never known the depth of his sacrifice, but I was also incredibly proud of him. Proud of the man who had been willing to risk everything, including his own life, to protect me and our family. And then, amidst the whirlwind of emotions, something else hit me: the house, the inheritance, the money. It was all part of a bigger story. It was all a result of Richard's secret life, his covert work, his bravery. I wasn't just inheriting a fortune. I was inheriting the legacy of a man who had done more for justice than I could have ever imagined. Richard hadn't betrayed me. He had been fighting for us, in ways I would never truly understand. And now, with the truth laid out before me, I finally saw him for who he truly was, not just my husband, but a hero. My name is Margaret Collins, and I am learning to see Richard, not through the lens of the man I thought I knew, but through the eyes of a woman who finally understands the depths of his love and sacrifice. With $33 million legally mine, I realized something I never could have imagined before. This was my chance. My chance to finally live life on my terms. To build something that was all mine. To not just be Richard's wife or Victoria's mother, but Margaret. Margaret Collins. The woman I always could have been if I had dared to dream bigger. I had spent so many years quietly standing in the background, blending in with the wallpaper of our life, keeping the house clean, making the dinners, hosting the parties, doing everything I was expected to do. But all that was about to change. The first thing I did was turn Richard's study into an art studio. That room, once filled with his books and papers, was where I spent years feeling like a spectator. It was his space, his world. But now, it was mine. I filled it with canvases, brushes, and colors. I hadn't picked up a paintbrush in decades. But suddenly, the urge was overwhelming. The creative side of me, the part of myself I had buried under years of routine, began to surface. I remember the first time I sat down at the easel, the paintbrush in my hand. It felt like I was finally free, finally doing something that was just for me. The room was quiet, save for the sound of the brush against the canvas. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peaceful. I wasn't just painting pictures, I was painting my freedom, my voice, my identity. But it wasn't just about art. With that newfound freedom came a sense of responsibility. I knew I had to use my wealth for something greater than myself. That's when I founded the Margaret Collins Foundation for Elder Protection. My heart ached every time I thought about all the women like me, women who had been cast aside by their families, manipulated, cheated, and abandoned. With my resources, I could do something. I could be the advocate I never had. The foundation provided legal support for seniors facing financial abuse. People like my own mother who had been taken advantage of. Like me, and countless others who had no voice. I partnered with lawyers who were passionate about defending those who couldn't defend themselves. I threw myself into it, channeling all my energy into something that could make a real difference. And just when I thought things couldn't get any more surreal, I got a call. Netflix. Yes, the Netflix. They wanted to turn my story into a documentary. I couldn't believe it. Imagine that, me, the woman my daughter had once dismissed as useless, now having a documentary made about my life. It was more than I could have ever dreamed. I had always believed that when people said, everything happens for a reason, it was just a comforting lie. But now, looking at everything I had built, my foundation, my art, my freedom, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, things really do fall into place when you least expect it. The most shocking part wasn't the millions or the media attention, though. It was the realization that, finally, I was in charge of my own life. I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. I wasn't asking for approval. I was living on my own terms. Victoria had told me I was useless, but I'd proven her wrong. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I was becoming the woman I always should have been, the woman who was always strong, always capable, but was never allowed to fully show it until now. And I'm learning to live for me, not for anyone else. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and paper. A place built for endings that try to behave like beginnings. I sat 3 rows back as the judge read the sentence's measured words, landing like stones on a still pond. Mark received years he couldn't charm his way out of. Victoria's eyes never found mine. When it was over, the murmurs rose and the gavel fell. And the world did what it always does. It moved on. I didn't, not yet. Outside, the air was bright and almost rude with its clarity. Reporters angled microphones toward me, the way people lean toward a flame. Mrs. Collins, how do you feel? I thought of every casserole, every sock mended, every night I'd folded my grief like linen and put it away for later. I gave them what I owed them, nothing. I walked past, my hands steady at my sides. At home, I opened the safe Harold had insisted I keep. Inside was a plain envelope with my name in Richard's handwriting. The kind that always leaned a little uphill, like hope. I'd seen it before, but grief had made a coward of me. Today, I broke the seal. Margaret, it began, if you're reading this, I wasn't brave enough to tell you everything while I was here to hold your hand. I believed silence would keep you safe. I was wrong. Your strength was always my best shield. He explained little more than I already knew. He apologized for the darkness he'd carried alone. And then one line that undid me. What I couldn't tell the world. My paintings told me you were the color I never learned to mix. I sat with that for a long time. The foundation's launch came a month later. In the old community hall where we'd once held bake sales and bingo nights, we replaced folding chairs with simple white ones, set lilies in borrowed mason jars, and asked the ushers to greet every guest by name. No velvet rope. No celebrity gloss, just a promise printed on a banner above the stage. Dignity is not negotiable. Harold spoke first, then Agent Martinez soft, thunder wrapped in a suit about patterns of abuse that hide in quiet houses. When it was my turn, I told the truth plainly, that love without respect curdles into power. That power without accountability is just a longer word for harm. That I had been called useless, and found, beneath the insult, an engine. We announced a small victory that felt like a miracle, a 24/7 hotline. Legal partners in 5 cities. And a fund named after my mother, Ruth, who could make $1 do tricks. People cried. People signed up to volunteer. The room felt like a quilt pulled over tired shoulders. Later, when the hall was empty and the last chair scraped back into storage, I drove to the cemetery. Dusk had turned the sky into a bruise. I stood by Richard's stone and placed the letter beneath the vase, tucked where the wind couldn't steal it. You were wrong about one thing, I whispered. Silence doesn't keep anyone safe, but truth does. And I'm keeping it now. On my way home, my phone buzzed with an unknown number from the county jail. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Victoria's voice came small through the static. Mom, she said, not sweet and not sharp, only human. I don't expect forgiveness. I keep hearing your shoes in the hallway. I keep thinking about the lasagna you made when I failed biology. I don't know why those are the memories. I do, I said. Because love leaves crumbs, even in a house set on fire. We were quiet together. Will you come? She asked finally. I'll come to the hearing where they ask about restitution and rehab, I said. I will tell them you are capable of better and require better. That is what respect looks like. She cried once. Like a hiccup, and the line went dead. That night I painted until the lamp burned low, a doorway, a woman with a suitcase, and beyond her light, shaped like a table set for 1, then 2, then many. I signed my name in the corner, the way Richard used to tilt his letters uphill. In the morning, I hung the canvas by the front door. When I opened it to the day, the hinges didn't creak. Justice had done its work. Mercy would be a practice. And I, Margaret Collins, stepped into a life I chose. Hands inked with color, pockets full of crumbs I would not waste. My house warm with the sound of a name spoken gently, mine.